Today, we invited Arkit Panda, the Stanton, senior fellow in the nuclear policy program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. His research interest includes a nuclear strategy, escalation, missiles, and then missile defense system. And he also, wrote a book, published a book, Kim Jong-un and Bomb, and then survival and deterrence in North Korea from the Oxford. And it's a great pleasure, to have you, Mr. Panda. And then hope, we listen to your interesting and a very intriguing, lecture. And then we will have a probably 15 to 20 minute, Q&A session. Floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peck. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you today about some of my research and observations. The theme of my talk today is North Korea's missile strategy. So I'll speak a bit about the specific role of missiles in North Korea's national defense strategy, the kinds of capabilities that North Korea possesses, and a few other issues relating to the country's missile programs. So the place to start, I think, before we talk about missiles in North Korea, is to first talk about nuclear deterrence. This is now a priority for North Korea's national defense strategy. I think it's fair to say it's the centerpiece of the country's national defense approach. It is the cornerstone of the way in which North Korean leader Kim Jong-un thinks about his country's defense. North Korea, of course, over the last 3 decades, has been on a quest to seek credible deterrence vis-a-vis the United States in particular. And over the last several years, Kim Jong-un has largely accomplished that objective, accomplished it in a fairly viable way. He's gone about demonstrating to the United States that North Korea possesses intercontinental delivery systems. These are long-range missiles that are designed to travel across the globe to potentially hold at risk targets in the continental United States. But at the same time, Kim Jong-un has also built a diverse nuclear arsenal, which also comprises nuclear-capable missiles that can be launched from submarines, nuclear-capable missiles that are shorter range, that are designed to hold targets on the Korean Peninsula, in South Korea, and in Japan, and other parts of the Indo-Pacific region, to include Okinawa, Guam, Hawaii, also at risk with nuclear weapons. The basic purpose of nuclear deterrence is to, of course, guarantee the survival of the Kim regime, but at the same time, nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence confer on the states that possess them a certain room for maneuver in international politics. And I think this is also true of North Korea. I think this is part of the reason why I think we're seeing Kim Jong-un behave with perhaps more confidence than we've ever seen him project in his now 12 years in power at the helm of North Korea. So making nuclear deterrence work, of course, requires credible capabilities, credible military capabilities. And this has really been central to the way in which North Korea has thought about its missile forces over time. Today, in 2024, heading into 2025, North Korea remains in the process of a missile modernization process. This is broadly part of its nuclear and military modernization. The modernization agenda was broadly laid out by leader Kim Jong-un in January 2021 at the 8th Party Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea, when Kim Jong-un outlined many objectives for his missile forces. He talked about qualitative improvements, improving his missiles, making them better, making them more precise, more lethal, more responsive, and at the same time also pursuing a quantitative modernization, which includes, of course, the expansion of the country's missile force, and most importantly, perhaps, the pursuit of nuclear fissile materials to build new warheads to go on those missiles. But for the rest of my talk, I'll mostly focus on the missile systems. I should also note here, of course, that we are in a new strategic environment in Northeast Asia today, where North Korea is rapidly deepening its partnerships with new countries, most prominent of these being the Russian Federation. Russia's longstanding policy in the aftermath of the Cold War, after the Soviet Union collapsed, was a policy of equidistance towards Seoul and Pyongyang. Today, Russia makes no pretense of equidistance. It is unequivocally far closer to North Korea and has essentially pulled North Korea into its broader orbit, seeking to take advantage of Kim Jong-un's willingness to run risks by sending missiles, munitions of all kinds, including artillery and mortars, and now personnel, Korean People's Army troops, to fight on the battlefields of Eastern Europe. Specifically, North Korean troops appear to be now present in Russia, fighting alongside Russian soldiers in Kursk. But this, of course, has raises the obvious question about what exactly are the North Koreans getting in return. And I'll get to this in a moment as well. So let's zoom out for a minute. Missiles are not uniquely a North Korean predilection. Every nuclear armed state today around the world favors missiles as their primary delivery system for choice. What is a missile? A missile is simply a means of delivery for a given payload that makes use of a rocket booster system. You have ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. To simplify things a little bit, cruise missiles are best thought of as essentially uncrewed aircraft without landing gears. They often use very much the same propulsion principles, at least. They fly within the Earth's atmosphere, but North Korea primarily relies on ballistic missiles for nuclear delivery. These are designed to elevate payloads, in many cases, to outside of the Earth's atmosphere, then allowing them to head towards their target, relying on nothing more, in many cases, than atmospheric drag and gravity. The North Koreans have also, of course, made substantial improvements to the precision of their missiles over time, including by adding, in many cases, inertial guidance, GPS guidance, and other forms of improvements to their precision capabilities. Now, this has, of course, made North Korea's nuclear capabilities more threatening and more lethal, but at the same time, it does contribute to the country's broader conventional modernization as well. And I think this should not be forgotten when we talk about North Korea's missile capabilities. Another important trend that we see in North Korea, particularly since 2017, which was the year that North Korea really crossed many of the key qualitative thresholds, is just a remarkable focus in North Korea on basing its missiles in new and different modes. And so what basing essentially means is the format in which the missile is physically kept in either a state of readiness or in a state of preparation to be deployed in a time of conflict. And so North Korea releases its missiles from road mobile systems. These are essentially large trucks that can carry missiles around the country. The North Koreans have shown that they can launch missiles from submarines. They have even put missiles on rail cars. At one point, they even launched missiles from an underwater submerged pontoon in an inland lake, demonstrating, I think, to the United States and South Korea just how challenging the problem of targeting these missiles might become in a time of war. All of this in cumulative is designed to make North Korea's nuclear forces and missile forces more broadly a lot more survivable, essentially making them impervious, or at least more impervious to a disarming strike attempt by South Korea and the United States. I think the North Koreans understand that in a time of war, it would be important for South Korea and the United States to combine their resources and efforts to try and locate every North Korean missile, every North Korean nuclear warhead, and attempt to destroy them so as to limit damage against their own societies. The North Koreans are making this task more difficult day by day. On that particular note, my opinion is that this task that the U.S. and South Korea have set out to accomplish is essentially going to be out of reach, I think, for the near future. Let's move on a little bit to missile testing and missile launches from North Korea. This, of course, is a vexing issue for many of our friends in South Korea in particular who describe these launches as provocations. And certainly they are illegal. They are prescribed by UN Security Council resolutions. That is undeniable. But the North Koreans push ahead anyways. They are undeterred by international law and the requirements of UN Security Council resolutions, and because nuclear deterrence is central to their national defense, they feel a compulsive need to continue launching these missiles. But the point I want to make on missile launching in North Korea today in 2024 is that we need to change our vocabulary when we talk about these events. In the past, we used to fairly accurately describe most missile launches in North Korea as tests. This was the idea that the North Koreans were building capability, they were experimenting, they were developing capabilities, they were seeing if their missile technologies would actually work as designed. Today, that does not really appear to be the case. The majority of North Korean missile launches since 2022 onwards have actually not been tests, they have been exercises. And I think this really underscores the degree to which North Korea has become a very capable possessor of missile technologies in general, and is now operationalizing its missile capabilities to contribute to both conventional and nuclear deterrence through operational exercises. From a policy perspective, the missile launching problem in peacetime is a difficult one for the US and South Korea, because I would actually make the argument that we as an alliance don't have a very useful deterrence toolkit for dealing specifically with the problem of peacetime missile launches. Why do I say this? Well, I've made the point already that international legal obligations don't do much to deter the North Koreans. Neither do sanctions, nor are the threats of force against North Korea likely to be credible or effective. And so we have basically two toolkits when it comes to deterrence. We can either threaten punishment or we can deny benefits. Neither is convincing when we talk about peacetime missile launches by North Korea. We cannot, of course, threaten punishment militarily against North Korea. It's not credible. The US and South Korea would have to be incredibly risk acceptant. I think the North Koreans understand that that is not the kind of cost that they would suffer for testing missiles in peacetime. And by the same token, denial, which has an application in thinking about deterrence of North Korean armed attacks on South Korea, denial doesn't really give us a good toolkit for dealing with the missile launch problem either, because when the North Koreans launch missiles, even if those missile launches fail, they will benefit. They acquire data, they acquire diagnostics, they acquire very useful information to continue refining their missile capabilities over time. And so the way in which this problem must be dealt with ultimately is one of, first of all, compartmentalizing missile launches in peacetime from the broader challenges that we face with North Korea as a US-ROK alliance, which is, of course, the prospect of North Korea initiating a deliberate conflict on the Korean Peninsula, which is the primary concern, I think, for the United States. The US and South Korea, I think, ultimately must be vigilant to changes in North Korea's approach to nuclear deterrence and missile capabilities in general. Now, I've been watching North Korea for a long time, and the good news is I do see more continuity than change in North Korea's strategic direction when it comes to nuclear weapons capabilities. What is, of course, concerning is Kim Jong-un's apparent growing confidence, which I think is in part a function of the greater confidence that Kim has in his own nuclear and missile capabilities. I think this is giving North Korea the room for maneuver in international politics that I think Kim Jong-un has potentially long sought. Kim is, of course, responding to geopolitical changes in Northeast Asia, and in the world more broadly, adapting to a period of great power competition between the US, Russia, and China. Before I conclude my remarks, though, I want to just underscore a few other points that I think speak to North Korea's adapting or the ways in which North Korea is adapting to this new environment. North Korea continues to have serious security concerns that I think do influence the ways in which it is operationalizing its missile strategy. I've referred to this before in this talk, but I do want to emphasize that the primary concern that North Korea has when it comes to deterrence and dissuasion more broadly is the scenario of a conventional attack against the country that results in the end of the regime. This is something that the US and South Korea explicitly promised North Korea if it ever uses nuclear weapons. And so Kim Jong-un has addressed this in a number of ways. In September 2022, North Korea revised its nuclear doctrine, for instance, to threaten the automatic and immediate retaliation against South Korea and the United States with nuclear weapons, even in a scenario where Kim Jong-un was killed or removed from power or North Korea's nuclear command and control systems were otherwise interrupted. At the same time, I think we see evidence that North Korea is adapting its command and control practices to ensure that Kim Jong-un can exercise control over his missile forces and his nuclear forces. The best way to think about command and control for non-experts, at least non-experts in nuclear weapons, is that they are the central nervous system of any nuclear force. It doesn't matter how good your missiles are, how reliable your nuclear warheads are, if you don't have the command and control systems to ensure that you can maintain control of those weapons, to have access to resort to their use when needed, and to also at the same time ensure that those weapons are never used accidentally or without authorization. I think both of these are important priorities for Kim Jong-un. Finally, let me close by just talking a little bit about the complementarity that I see between North Korea's intercontinental forces and its shorter range theater forces. There was a reason that Kim Jong-un did not declare his nuclear deterrent complete before 2017. 2017 was the year when North Korea demonstrated ICBMs. The fundamental challenge for the North Koreans was, how do you resolve and project deterrence messages to South Korea and the US forces on the Korean Peninsula, while at the same time deterring the United States, which is a global superpower with nuclear capabilities, half a globe away? And the answer to that problem for the North Koreans was intercontinental weapons. But at the same time, intercontinental weapons aren't going to be the ones that the North Koreans choose to employ at the start of a nuclear conflict. Those will be the shorter range systems. And so for the North Koreans, both components of their broader strategic deterrence approach remain central. And so we can't really disentangle the ICBMs and the short-range capabilities. They are part and parcel of the ways in which the North Koreans conceive of their missile strategy and their nuclear deterrence strategy more broadly. So, Dr. Peck, I think I will stop there, and I look forward to engaging with you in a discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your concrete and detailed, lecture on this, North Korea's missile, technology and the missile, capacity. Then, my first question might be, how do you, for our, the audience is informed public. So your technical prowess is pretty impressive, and that actually informed me very well. I learned a lot. But how do you evaluate the North Korea's missile capacity level in terms of the other countries? I mean, level of probably it's not probably the United States or Russia, probably not China. But which country can you compare with North Korea?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I would say that we underrate and underestimate the North Koreans at our own peril. I think it's difficult to draw direct comparisons between the North Korean program and other countries. There's a lot of peculiarities in North Korea. The North Koreans have, by some counts, I think, more active missile development programs, or at least prototypes, than most other countries. I mean, they simply develop a variety of missiles in ways that really don't appear to be economical. But I think in many ways, the North Koreans exhibit sophistication in some regards that might be on par with countries like Iran, like Pakistan, India, and other countries that have possessed missiles and nuclear capabilities for quite a bit of time. Of course, the evidence we have does still have limits, although I have to say the debris that's been recovered from Ukraine, where North Korean ballistic missiles have been used, including newer North Korean ballistic missiles, does, of course, allow us to get some interesting insights about how these missiles have performed and how the North Koreans have gone about procuring components, including from overseas, to build these missiles. But overall, I will say, for the purposes of deterrence, missiles don't have to be perfect, right? This is a centerpiece of the debate, particularly in South Korea, about whether the North Koreans, for instance, have a reentry vehicle for their ICBMs, or whether their missiles are reliable enough to achieve their deterrence objectives. Deterrence is fundamentally not about the nuts and bolts of capabilities, although credibility does matter in that regard, but it's fundamentally the act of manifesting in the mind of your adversary the threat of essentially things going wrong in a time of war and in a time of conflict. And I think the North Korean missile force in aggregate is sufficient in its sophistication to accomplish that objective vis-a-vis both the US and South Korea, I would argue.
Yeah, at the same time, it's missiles, ICBM and short and middle range missiles are meaningful for the deterrence because it has nuclear weapons. Nuclear warhead put on the missiles, and that makes the difference of North Korea's missile capacity and then deterrence capacity. But then my next question is going to be, how about South Korea? How do you evaluate missile capacity of South Korea so far in comparison with the North Korea and probably France or UK?
So South Korea is incredibly impressive in its missile prowess. It is one of the most sophisticated non-nuclear countries with ballistic missile capabilities. South Korea has an array of short-range ballistic and cruise missiles with really impressive degrees of precision, which South Korea repeatedly publicly demonstrates to, I think, accomplish the credibility of its own deterrence vis-a-vis North Korea, communicating to Kim Jong-un that in a time of conflict, that South Korea will be able to find Kim personally, that South Korea will be able to destroy North Korean missiles. The problem still, I think, for South Korea is not the actual missile itself, right? I think we know that South Korean missiles are very impressive in what they can accomplish. It's all of the enabling technologies and associated military tasks that factor into what experts call the kill chain. The kill chain is this. I should be careful with my terminology because South Korea has a strategy called the kill chain, which is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kill chain in the generalized sense that term is used in the field of strategic studies, where It refers to essentially the ability to find, fix, and finish a target, where the finding part is actually quite difficult in North Korea. Right, so in a time of conflict, the North Koreans will be hiding their capabilities. They'll be moving them around. They'll be driving their missile systems around their country, where they have mountains, forests, tunnels, and other kinds of areas where they can shelter and hide from South Korea's intelligence capabilities. But the problem for South Korea will fundamentally be finding the targets. And once the targets are found, the South Koreans can strike them with a fair degree of reliability. But that task is quite difficult. And this isn't just a problem for South Korea. I would argue that this problem of finding North Korean missiles, mobile missiles, in a time of conflict is going to be very difficult for the United States as well, and likely will remain intractable. And I actually don't expect that even artificial intelligence capabilities, which are starting to get quite a bit of interest, including in South Korea, will be able to rectify this in a time of war, at least not at a high enough level of probability.
Yeah.
South Korea's missile ambitions, though, I think have taken on an interesting character in recent years. South Korea is now building extremely large payload conventional missiles. The largest conventional payload missiles in the world today are fielded by South Korea, such as the Hyunwoo 5 and these other sort of accompanying missile systems, which are designed to penetrate deeply buried targets in North Korea as well. So we see on the Korean Peninsula, I think, two very different approaches to missile technologies and capabilities. But for both South Korea and North Korea, missiles are central to their national deterrence strategies and defense strategies. The problem that I would highlight, though, on the Korean Peninsula that does give me concern as an analyst who thinks about escalation in particular is, of course, the preemptive preference that exists in both North and South Korea, where in both countries' missile strategies, there is a premium placed on striking first. And that is a recipe for instability because it creates what the American nuclear strategist Thomas Schelling, for instance, once described as the reciprocal fear of surprise attack, where in a time of crisis, when A and B, we don't have to call them North and South Korea, but A and B, if A wants to shoot first and B wants to shoot first, both will be worried that the other will go first, which creates pressures to go first to avoid having the other go first. And so you can see how that can get quite dangerous. And so this is a problem that I think requires addressing. It is difficult, of course, to address this cooperatively with the North Koreans, given that the North Koreans have no interest in speaking with South Korea or the United States today. But the argument that I make is that essentially there are ways in which South Korea and the United States can adapt our approach to deterrence vis-a-vis North Korea without placing a premium on going first, essentially, in the way that we currently do.
And then it just you just lead me to the next question again and again, and then but basically what you are saying, or the other experts on the missile systems and the missile weapon system and nuclear weapon system, basically the United States cannot do anything about North Korean nuclear and the missile technology development. Is it right?
Technology development is very difficult at this point to roll back or limit. I think we can do something very important still, which is create friction for the North Koreans. And so I think that is essentially the purpose of our sanctions and counterproliferation efforts and export controls. I referenced the debris that we've recovered from Ukraine, where we've been able to look into North Korea's new missiles. We understand from that debris that the North Koreans are still very good at illicit procurement. They are procuring various components from the United States and other Western countries. And so the purpose of our broader counterproliferation approach to North Korea must be to make life difficult for Kim Jong-un.
Sure.
We're not going to deprive North Korea of the knowledge they've already acquired. And unfortunately, the knowledge they have already acquired is so sufficient, is sufficient to the point where they've even indigenized large parts of the missile supply chain. They are able to construct even large, fairly complex liquid propellant engines and solid propellant engines domestically with some inputs from overseas. But
you mean
our
Russia?
policy, from Russia, yes, but also from other countries. This is essentially technological prowess that predates the ongoing cooperation between Russia and North Korea, which I think we'll get to in a minute, but I think can lead us to dangerous territory if the Russians do decide to fully cooperate with the North Koreans in developing these capabilities. But so I don't mean to say that we don't have any ability to affect North Korea's choices or the way in which it approaches its capabilities, but I genuinely think that rolling back North Korea's capabilities or limiting North Korea's ambitions or pursuit of certain capabilities that it deems to be strategically significant for its deterrence needs is unlikely to be successful. And so I think the most practical approach is to focus on the friction that our efforts can introduce into Kim Jong-un's efforts to buttress his nuclear forces.
My last question is going to be on Russia. What would be the role of Russia in this advancing even more? I mean, North Korean, missile and nuclear technology.
It's unclear at this point the degree to which Russia and North Korea are meaningfully cooperating in the area of nuclear and missile technology specifically. And I just say that to point out that the evidence is still indeterminate. We don't have any smoking guns, but of course this is an area where the United States and South Korea must be vigilant, given the extremely serious consequences for U.S. and South Korean security if North Korea does receive assistance from the Russian Federation. There are reasons to be skeptical that this is the area where cooperation is most likely to manifest. In the Russia-North Korea relationship, we do have an asymmetry, we have an imbalance, we have something of a transactional logic, even if the relationship isn't purely transactional. There is a genuine strategic logic pulling Russia and North Korea together. But the reason I highlight that is that even if Kim Jong-un asks Vladimir Putin for the world, he asks for access to Russian nuclear weapons designs, for advanced Russian ICBM technologies, the Russians don't have to begin cooperation in that area. They can assist the North Koreans with they can offer other things. They can improve Kim Jong-un's air defense capabilities. They can improve North Korea's command and control capabilities. Military satellites are even an area where the Russians might be able to assist the North Koreans. And the Russians do still have an interest. It's not the same interest that they had perhaps 5 or 10 years ago on nonproliferation, but they do still have an interest in nonproliferation from the perspective of at least diluting their own status in the international system as a global superpower with nuclear weapons by deliberately spreading nuclear technology. I think this is part of the reason why even during the Cold War, the Soviet Union began to favor nonproliferation, apart from, of course, the implications for its own security interests if nuclear weapons were to spread. Now, the North Koreans, of course, have their own nuclear weapons as well already. So I suspect you're going to see a push and pull here where the North Koreans are likely behind the scenes asking the Russians for quite a bit. The Russians, I do think, will cooperate in some areas, but in the most sensitive areas, strategic missile technologies, nuclear weapons, I think the pace of cooperation will still likely be fairly modest. Now, I do want to note here, though, that the treaty that Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un concluded earlier this year, a treaty that's now been ratified by both countries through their respective legal processes, Article 10 of that treaty includes language on peaceful nuclear energy cooperation, which is interesting because it can offer a justification or a fig leaf for technology transfer from Russia on nuclear fuel cycle technologies in particular, where the Russians have tremendous expertise. This could include, of course, helping the North Koreans with their gas centrifuge capabilities, which are essential for producing highly enriched uranium, which can be used in nuclear weapons. The Russians could even assist the North Koreans with experimentation with new, more efficient reprocessing techniques for plutonium. The North Koreans are, of course, building what we think is still an experimental light water reactor at Yongbyon. Russian technical assistance could also accelerate the entry into operation of that particular facility. So there are many ways in which this cooperation could substantially change the contours of how we've traditionally thought about North Korea's capabilities. But I still think the most likely area where we are going to see evidence of concrete Russian assistance is going to be in the area of conventional arms and potentially space.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peck.
All right.